So, why did Chinese stocks continue tanking even after the Federal Reserve's announcement? What the heck is happening, man? When the market tanks, Chinese stocks tanks together. When the market recovers, Chinese stocks still continue tanking. So are we really doomed and stuck back holding all these different Chinese equities in our portfolio? So the last week or so, it had been a rather eventful ride for most retail investors because of the heightened volatility due to some potential catalysts such as the Federal Reserve meeting and the worrying about the interest rates hike. So you can observe many YouTube related stocks which are categorically classified as growth stocks experience some form of revaluation due to the looming fears of interest rate affecting the discount rate, etc. So on the other side of the house, Chinese equities that were listed in the US exchange were more affected by the DD scandal and also their delisting plans, rather than any interest rate hikes. And even if to bump up the interest rate by a few notches, many of these Chinese companies are already valued like they are as if worthless. The cute thing is, I see many discussions surrounding how investors are afraid of things like the Chinese GDP slowdown, the Evergrande default, and even the delisting risk from all the different US exchanges, etc. So my principal concern for another maybe 30 to 40% drop from here will happen when the US market collapses. I'm not trying to insinuate that it will happen or it might happen since I'm fully invested anyway, but only a US market-wide crash will trigger a ripple effect to the rest of the markets. Even though, objectively speaking, we know that many of these underlying Chinese businesses are quite insulated from the United States particularly. So no, don't get too obsessed over Evergrande or even Olympics or whatever that is on your laundry list. Just keep your focus on the US inflation rate or any signs of a black swan event. So China has always minded their own business, so you don't have to worry too much for them. You know what else to not get me worried with? Of course, is to smash the like button. Anyway, Chinese equity investors are essentially stuck holding the bag. The recovery or upside, at least in the short term, seems extremely bleak because of the recent developments and the heightened posture amongst both global powers. So talks about delisting, boycotting of the Olympics, and even banning investments are not helping either way. That said, however, whenever there are scares for a potential market-wide crash in the United States, there will have an inevitable spillover effect on Chinese equities by and large as well. So after the Fed announcement yesterday, you can see that there was a market-wide rally based on the heat map that I'll be attaching somewhere here. And it was definitely a long-awaited wait amongst all the retail investors. So there were much more clarity guided by the Fed, and many of the so-called growth stocks had already taken a beating. But begs the question, why China? And why does China equities continue to nosedive? So essentially speaking, on the same day, political tensions actually escalated to an all-time high again. So the first crack started when the US made a public announcement with regards to the diplomatic boycott to the Olympics, or at least to the Winter Olympics, citing reasons such as genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang. So they alluded to the disgust against the Chinese government's crackdown on the Uyghur and other predominantly Muslim ethnic minorities in the region, including mass detention and forced use of contraception and sterilization. So it really got me thinking. One moment, you are calling the Muslim faith inherently evil, breeding extremist ideology and causing havoc to the world. The next moment, you start sending in troops to protect your democratic ideology. And in the meantime, you take out some civilian lives in the name of protecting peace with classified information. And of course, after screwing up, you just went, oopsie daisy. And now, you are upholding the sanctity of life, wanting to champion against the alleged genocide on Muslims. Up until this point, I'm just confused. But I don't want to get too political, so I'll just leave this commentary here. There are always two sides of the coin, and I know that I didn't really get into the nuances of all these different developments. So for those of you who wants to know more details, please go and do your own research. But that is considering on the political front. So back to why Chinese stocks plunge. The Biden administration just released a plan to ban American investments in the world's largest drone maker and 7 other specific Chinese companies in what the US says are their role in China's mass surveillance on Muslim ethnic group. Companies being added to the blacklist include DJI Technology and several other leading developers of facial recognition technology that have supplied products to the Chinese security agencies involved in the surveillance and detention of Uyghur and other Muslim ethnic groups. So it comes with the fact that the Biden administration has also broadened their efforts in recent weeks to limit Chinese tech companies' access to US investments, advanced machineries, and other leading-edge technologies. So the US officials are also considering to add more Chinese tech companies to the separate Commerce Department list. So this essentially controls the exports of US goods and technology. So this essentially stirred up concerns again for Chinese-related companies, because I was just reading a commentary just not too long ago. Alibaba was also part of this entire operation, because if you were to think about it, they essentially own the entire underlying infrastructure to facilitate any forms of commerce transaction. So if they want to go down that line of argument to ban companies that are involved in this alleged genocide, Alibaba will also be culpable in facilitating the transaction and delivery of these goods that enabled the authorities, or at least the local Chinese authorities, to exercise their powers. So on that same train of thought, all these people can join the Olympics jumping event, representing their country, since they're all so good at jumping to conclusions. First, Didi delist, so Alibaba will delist too. Second, US restrict investments and trade with specific companies. Alibaba will be next on the list. You might as well put this into the entire concoction, saying that the US will also invade China, since it's not surprising, and it's also not the first time that the US always send their troops in to sovereign countries to kill off their innocent civilians. See the problem with this sort of conclusion? Which is why I usually just refrain from making such conclusions so haphazardly. But since this is making such a ruckus, I needed to put forth some of these discussions just to let you see what I mean. Anyway, China conducted an extensive campaign of surveillance and detention of Uyghurs and other minorities in Xinjiang following sporadic violences, and the Chinese officials actually described these acts as an act of terrorism. So at least this is the China side of the story. So when China combats terrorism, it's genocide. When the US combats terrorism, it's to maintain world peace and world order. I know, I'm in no position to comment on the development there either way. Truth be told, I also don't 100% trust the Chinese government's explanation, since they haven't been transparent about it anyway. So let's just keep this discussion finance related. Anyhow, this constant retort between the two countries are probably not going to come to an end anytime soon. So for those of you who have been holding Chinese equities related companies, you should know about this. So this exchange also signals that the power dynamics between the two countries is slowly experiencing tectonic shifts. It seems like the US can no longer bully their way through this war against China. And I use this word war extremely cautiously. If you have been following the developments, all they've been doing thus far are just grabbing onto the low-hanging fruits, taking a few low jabs at the bear, and bear if you know what I mean, and hope to maintain the image that they've been actively doing something against this evil foe, while keeping the narrative at home to draw support from their home bases. For those of you who have been following me for quite some time and bother actually watching through the entire video length, I'm sure you know I'm not anti-American or anti-American, however you like to pronounce it. And in fact, I've mentioned in a number of occasions that the US have been and will continue to be the greatest country of at least my time. So it just pains me to see such meaningless struggle and attempts hurting the stakeholders around the pot of trouble they wish to stir time and time again. For those of you who remain interested in investing in Chinese-related companies, I think you have already evolved to become immune towards such geopolitical tensions and geopolitical news. So your investment in China should always be a strategic one. And for those of you who are already stuck in it for so long, should still continue revisiting your underlying bull thesis from time to time. So if you liked it at $200, what exactly changed when it's currently hovering at 120? If you're going to start telling me about the idea of, because there's an opportunity cost, how your money could be better deployed elsewhere, take some time, sit down with yourself, do your own evaluation, and really ask if there is another company with such huge risk-reward ratio, and if you look towards the long term, calculate essentially what is the compound return or the CAGR of Alibaba's return based on your price target for the seemingly fundamentally strong company in 2030. So just to flesh out some quick and dirty numbers, if your price target is $500 in 2030, your CAGR is sitting at around 70%. If it's at $600, your CAGR bumps up to 19.5%. And lastly, if your price target is $700 in 2030, your CAGR is 21.65%. So really, sit yourself down and think again. With that, I'll see you in the next video, but more importantly, I'll see you on the moon. Goodbye!